بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله حمدا يوالي نعمه ويدفع نقمه ويكافي مزيده، وصلوات الله وسلامه وبركاته على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وعملا وهدى وتقى يا رب العالمين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. رب أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين وأعوذ بك رب أن يحضرون. تبرأت من حولي وقوتي واعتصمت بحول الله وقوته ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. اللهم اجعل اجتماعنا هذا اجتماعا مرحوما، واجعل تفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما، ولا تجعل فينا ولا منا ولا معنا شقيا ولا محروما. اللهم زدنا ولا تنقصنا، وأكرمنا ولا تهنا، واعطنا ولا تحرمنا، وآثرنا ولا تؤثر علينا، وارضنا وارض عنا. ربنا إنا نسألك الهدى والتقى والعفاف والغنى. يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك. رب اغفر لوالدينا، رب ارحمهم كما ربونا صغارا. ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما. اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا وعملا صالحا متقبلا. After praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and asking him to send his peace and blessings and salutations and benedictions upon our Imam and exemplar Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his family and companions and followers until the last day, I greet you all with the greeting of Islam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And I hope you're all keeping well, yourselves, your families, your loved ones, your friends, your neighbors, and your communities, inshallah. The topic of tonight's discussion is an extension of what we discussed last week, which was the topic of Zakat. And we spoke about the importance and the significance of the topic of Zakar. And we mentioned how it is an actual pillar of the deen itself, and how actually so much of what we know about the dunya is, accumulated knowledge. But when it comes to our deen, has the knowledge really grown and developed and evolved in the same way or a similar way, at least, if not ideally even more so? So you can speak to, for example, a 6-year-old child and ask the child, what is zakah? And the child will say it's the third pillar of Islam. Then you ask not a 6-year-old, but a 16-year-old, what is zakah? And they'll say it's third pillar and 2.5%. But then when you move on to the 26 or 36 or 46-year-old and ask them, what is zakah? You'll find that the answer remains as third pillar and 2.5%. And so our knowledge hasn't really grown. It hasn't developed. It hasn't evolved from the point where we were really young and just knew it's the third pillar and 2.5%. And yet we say it is an actual pillar of the deen. So the reality and the rhetoric don't really go hand in hand. And what we need to do is bring the two on a par, such that our reality reflects the rhetoric, that when we say it's a pillar, we treat it as a pillar. In fact, it's mentioned in the Quran 32 times. And so many times it's mentioned, aqimu salat wa atu zakat, to the salat and zakah as next to each other, as twins, one to another. One being the huququllah and the other one being the huququllah and huququl ibad, both the right of Allah and the right of the poor and the needy. And so it's something we should really take seriously, and we ought to give it the priority and the precedence that it deserves. I was going to just say something regarding the method of calculating zakah and deal with some of the FAQs as well. But first and foremost, let's deal with the overall formula for calculating one's zakah duty. So the three golden lessons that I want to share with yourselves. The first is the lesson that says, the rule that says all personal assets are exempt from zakah. There's no zakah on any of your personal assets except for cash, gold, and silver. So cash, gold, and silver are subject to zakah, but everything else is not subject to zakah. There's no zakah on your jacket, your shirt, your clothing, your stationery, your mobile phone, your laptop, your books, all of these are not subject to zakah so long as they are your personal assets. You don't pay zakat on your house, your residential house, or houses that you own as just, something that you own as a personal asset. On your car, on your washing machine, your fridge, none of these are subject to zakat. It's only on cash, gold, and silver. Second rule is that business assets are always zakatable based on the selling price on the day of your zakat. What is a business asset? A business asset is an asset which you have acquired. You bought it with the intention of selling. So you bought it with the intention of selling. Not that something that you've got and you're thinking, maybe I can sell this jacket, or maybe I can sell this hat, etc. It's something that you bought with the intention of reselling, of selling. And that you don't assess its value based on the price you bought it for, but the price for which you can sell it, and you intend to sell it right now today. Okay, so that's the second rule. The business assets are those assets that were bought with the intention of selling, of doing business with it, and that you always add the value of the market value, the selling price on that day. Okay, the zakat date. The third lesson or rule is this: that when it comes to paying zakat, who pays zakat when it comes to debts and loans? The one who lent you the money, or you, the one who's borrowed the money? The answer is the one who lent the money is the one who owns the money. You just borrowed it. It's not your money. So you would not be liable to pay it. He or she who lent you the money is the actual creditor, the owner of the money. And thus they would be the ones who are liable for paying the zakat in those years. Similarly, if you lent someone else the money, it's you who'd pay the zakat, not them. That's the third golden rule. So again, number one was personal assets are all exempt from zakat except for cash, gold, and silver. Secondly, that business assets are those assets bought with the intention of selling, and that you always pay zakat on the selling price the day that your zakat would be due. Thirdly is about the topic of debts, and you pay the creditor is the one who pays zakat, not the debtor. Okay, we've got some footnotes to each one of these points, but that should suffice right now. Let's first do the first question, which is how much is the nisab? How much is the nisab currently? Well, the nisab varies from asset to asset. Is it gold we're talking about, or silver, or the like? Livestock. The Prophet set the threshold. That's what the nisab is, the threshold, which if you own it, you pay zakat on all of that asset. So gold, the threshold of nisab was 20 mithqals of gold, which equates currently to around 3,619 pounds. 3,619 pounds. That's 3,619. The nisab for silver is 350 pounds. 370 pounds. Sorry, 370 is the nisab for silver. Which nisab do you use? Do you use the nisab for silver or the one for gold? Some scholars say use gold because it's more kind of the stable and the one that's more clearly attributed to the time of the Prophet ﷺ and in certain ahadith, etc. Others said silver, or whichever one is more beneficial for the poor, i.e. the lower one. The counter argument to that is, well, actually, by choosing the lower one, aren't you potentially making people who would ordinarily be considered poor? 370 pounds is not an awful lot of money, let's face it. They are paying zakat when maybe they would be eligible to receive zakat. So there are arguments both sides. More often than not, I find people tend to use the zakat for nisab of silver when calculating then the zakat duty. And that means you're not separating gold and silver separately. Some do, but actually you're saying cash, gold, silver all together. How much does it equal to? Is it equal to be 370 pounds or 3,619? And then you pay 2.5% on the full amount. So for example, if one adds one's cash, gold, and silver, and it ends up being £4,000 in the bank account. You do not do 4,000 minus the nisab of £370. You rather look at £4,000 and you pay 2.5% on the full 4,000, which would be £100. So it would be £100 altogether for £4,000 of zakat, £4,000 of cash, gold, and silver altogether you have. Then you pay £100 and your zakat would be done. And so that is what the nisab itself is. Does one pay zakat on jewelry? Well, the scholars discussed whether one pays zakat on jewelry such as gold and silver. They all agree that there's no zakat on non-gold and non-silver jewelry. So, for example, diamonds, rubies, emeralds, sapphires, zircons, precious stones, even platinum, none of that is actually subject to zakat. But gold and silver is, right? According to the Hanafi school of thought. And there's some nuances in the other schools, the Shafi'i, the Maliki schools of thought, etc., etc. So, for example, the Maliki school of thought will point out that if the jewelry is kind of broken and is not being worn, then it's no longer like a personal effect in that sense. It's now just become equivalent to gold, which is stashed on the side as for its monetary value. So that would then make it more akin to standard gold or silver, as opposed to just a personal effect. The point here being that the safer option, inshallah, is to pay zakat on one's jewelry as well. And so that's the next point to be borne in mind. I wanted to also add that what happens if it is if the jewelry is gold plated? Well, gold plated jewelry is not actually gold. It's just non-gold, non-metal, non-gold, given a lining of gold, unless, of course, it's silver, jewelry which is gold plated, or vice versa, etc. Then that would be different altogether. And that would be zakatable. So that then should be clear. So gold plated is not zakatable because it's not actually the majority of the item. The majority of it needs to be actually gold or silver for it to be subject to zakat. Regarding the stones I mentioned earlier, the precious stones, yes, if one is a diamond trader or ruby trader, or even if you're not a big, large-scale trader, but just you're buying and selling them, then that would be subject to zakat, because now it's become a trade good, stock and trade. Unfinished good items, so if you think work in progress, you look at how much is it worth at its current stage and in its current state, and that's the value you'd add in terms of for stock which is not fully ready for sale. People ask about their date of zakat. The date of zakat ordinarily would be from the Islamic calendar, so not January, February, March, because we know that for the leap years and so forth, but it would be within the Islamic calendar, or the lunar calendar, at least, let's say, and that would be, Rajab, Sha'ban, Ramadan. It doesn't have to be Ramadan. People often choose Ramadan because it's an easy time of the year to remember it. They also point out that the reward for giving in Ramadan is great. The reward outside Ramadan can, in certain instances, according to many of the scholars, be greater if the need is greater, or because it creates issues for the charitable work, or the zakat work, I should say, not charitable work, because zakat is not just a charity, it's actually a due. Charity has the sense of something that's voluntary. They just give, something positive to do, but not a must. Whereas spiritually, religiously, ethically, it's a must for the one who, is sahib al-nasab, who has enough of wealth surplus that they actually need to be giving it, and enough being defined, as we'll mention in the next question, inshallah. So who has to pay zakat and who doesn't? We said if your surplus assets, that's beyond the things that you're actually using, are equal or above the nisab, then you would be paying zakat if your zakatable assets are equal or above the nisab. Yes, if you've got cash, which is, let's say, £5,000, but your debts are greater than £5,000, then you're technically in the red, and you would not then be paying zakat at all, unless those debts are of a very different nature, which we'll come on to, inshallah. What sort of debts are exempt from zakat? The sort of debt which is exempt from zakat is a debt which is like a bad debt, which is exactly what it says on the tin, as we say in English. So that means a debt which is, you've lost hope of being able to recover it, either because that's your genuine, estimation of what's going on. You're just never going to get back. You don't pay zakat on it. Or the person denies the fact that you ever gave it, and you've got no way of proving it. Or they say to you that they're never going to pay it back, and there's no way you can kind of seek redress by legally or kind of with the people etc., saying to them, come on, you should be mindful of your ethical and your spiritual, religious, Islamic duty, fear Allah, etc. So then again, that would be not included in the zakat. As for the other debts, within some of the madhab, they make a categorization between dain qawi, a strong debt, a weak debt, medial debt. So personal debts are strong debts, but you pay them back either year on year, or you can pay them back when you get them but then pay back for all the years that you did not pay for that amount, either the money that you lent out to someone. What about zakat for minors? Do they pay zakat or not? This varies based on the madhahib. So the Shafi'i, the Maliki, and the Hanbali schools say that a minor, that's someone below the age of bulugh, then there would be zakat due from their wealth if they, I don't know, they've got a bank account of £5,000, £2,000, which is above the nisab, equal or above the nisab, then yes, the parents would arrange for that payment to be made on their behalf. Or if that's not possible for some reason, then when they reach the age of legal majority in 18 and they have access to the trust or whatever, then they would pay, and they would backdate all those payments as well. According to the Hanafi school of thought, however, the person is only due to pay zakat on their wealth after they are baligh, which is once they're physically mature, and of course the assuming there's no mental impediments as well to them being mukhatab or addressed by the Islamic teachings, spiritually speaking. What about zakat on shares? If your shares are buying and selling, then you look at the market value. If, however, you have them for dividends and that you're just drawing, then you pay 1% of the market value. 1% of the market value is all that you would pay, inshallah ta'ala. Pensions, you need to look at whether the pension is a final salary pension or a money purchase pension. And also you need to look at whether it is a Sharia compliant one, as it's known as, because if it is a Sharia compliant one and a money purchase pension, which is likely to be the case, then often it's invested in things which are just like building, real estate, or sometimes shares, and often with a majority in the building, in properties. Now, let's say for someone who's, I don't know, a high-flying city worker, and now over the years their pension pots become, I don't know, £1 million or million plus. Now, in that instance, what happens is that the property itself is not subject to zakat. However, because it's not being bought and sold, it's just being bought for the purposes of renting out. So you'd only be paying zakat on the rental income, which would be far less than £1 million, as you can appreciate. It'll probably be, I don't know, 25k or 30k per annum, which, if the person's earning very vast sums, then paying 2.5% on then paying 2.5% on let's say the £25,000 would be 600 odd pounds, £625, and they themselves would be earning, I don't know, several hundred thousand, so like 700 or 800,000 pounds a year. That's the sort of person who maybe we're talking about. Then that's very doable and affordable. In most people's cases, however, we're talking about much more moderate amounts, and still, again, the same principle applies, which is, you look at the nature of the shareholdings, and of the other things in the portfolio, and then you'd pay the zakat on it. There would be views out there which say that, given the fact you don't have access to the pension, you'd pay it only once you start drawing the pension, or you're receiving the if you like, the pension funds, because you've now retired. What about zakat on? What about the zakat on student loans? Well, student loans work in the way that you have when you're earning £25,000 per annum or more. I think that's the threshold right now. Someone can correct me if it's been changed more recently. But if you're earning £25,000 a year, let's just say, then a certain amount will be taken from your earnings at source before your earnings are deposited into your bank account. That means the rationale for deducting it from your bank balance, the amount that's going to be taken from you, does not really apply, because the rationale is that your money would not be secure in your bank account because the authorities, or whoever the creditor is, would be able to deduct it from your assets. But here, it's not deducted from your existing assets. It's going to be deducted from your future assets at source. So you don't need to deduct anything from your assets when calculating your zakat liability, because you have a student loan, because actually that doesn't really apply in your case. Okay. Can you pay zakat for future years, or in installments? The answer is you shouldn't be paying, in principle, you wouldn't be paying zakat in installments, because actually that's someone else's wealth. That's the poor person's wealth. So they should be given it immediately. And it's just theirs to do what they would like, in principle. That's how zakat works. However, what you can do, let's say today's your zakat date. You pay today's zakat amount in full. But next year's amount, what you anticipate, you imagine what it's likely to be, on average, this is the amount, and you can start paying that amount, next year's 12th of Ramadan. You can pay that from now on a monthly basis in segments. And then when the 12th of Ramadan next year, if 12th of Ramadan happened to be your zakat due date, zakat anniversary date, you look, have you underpaid or overpaid? If it's underpaid, then you add that extra buffer and you top it up, and that would then settle things altogether. If you've overpaid, then you can have made the intention that, so long as you made the intention, anything extra will go to the subsequent year, the next year, the future year's amount of zakat. What's the proof that you can pray in future years? Is the hadith of Abbas radiallahu anhu, that they came into the Prophet ﷺ, and Abbas was the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, saying, Ya Rasulullah, Abbas was not paying zakat, and he said he's already paid. He'd paid for 2 years hence. And so from that, the scholars infer that this is something that's allowed. This is from the Hanafi, the Shafi'i, and the Hanbali school of thought. So those are some of the questions too that are often asked regarding zakat. In terms of the calculation of zakat. Same thing goes with mahar. The mahar, that once the wife has it, it's her wealth, and she would then be paying zakat on it. CTFs, child trust funds, for those who have it, the same principle applies as we've alluded to earlier on. Missed years of zakat. One should not be missing, previous years zakat, of course, but once that's happened, one needs to try and calculate what amount of assets they had on their zakat date in each of the subsequent years. And alhamdulillah, that's something possible. It's quite doable because of alhamdulillah, all the technology we have and the bank statements and the like. Calculate it and inshallah pay it off pay that debt off to the poor and the needy, because it's their wealth, not ours. And that's how it should be dealt with. Who can you pay zakat to? Well, actually, the answer to this is not from me or from you or from someone else. It's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran itself. So Allah says in Surah At-Tawbah, verse 90, Allah says, إِنَّمَا الصَّدَقَاتُ لِلْفُقَرَاءِ وَالْمَسَاكِينِ وَالْعَامِلِينَ عَلَيْهَا وَالْمُؤَلَّفَةِ قُلُوبُهُمْ وَفِي الرِّقَابِ وَالْغَارِمِينَ وَفِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَابْنِ السَّبِيلِ. And so it's only payable to the poor and the needy and the workers of zakah, and in the reconciling of the hearts, and the debtors, and making amends between people, and freeing of the slaves if there are slaves, and in the way of Allah, and the wayfarer. Some people mistake this meaning of in the way of Allah, and they think that that means anything good. No, it had a very specific meaning, and that was the defense of the realm at the time. So this would be, paying the wages of the army or the military service of the country. However, the point to be understood is that that is fi sabilillah. It's not anything good, because the ayah begins innama, only solely and exclusively is zakat payable to, and then Allah mentions the 8 categories. Now, it would not make any linguistic sense, and the Quran is the most eloquent book. It's the speech of Allah. It would not make any sense for Allah Jalla wa Ala to say only solely exclusively, and he lists 8 categories, the 7th of which is anything good and positive. So the 4 schools of thought, the Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali school of thought, all say it's not payable to just any good cause. Some of them will include, for example, the talib al-ilm, the student of knowledge, because that's, if you like, the theoretical, intellectual defense of protection of the realm. Others also included the hajj, because that's also mentioned in the sabil as well, the way of God, of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But otherwise, not for other causes. So you can't pay zakat, for example, for the building or the construction of a mosque. You can't pay zakat for the building of just an orphanage, which or you want to build, because orphans aren't necessarily always poor. And moreover, it needs to be something that they become owners of, or they're kind of giving them the money, and then they can pay if they want to pay. That needs to be a genuine, bona fide transaction. You can't just do it for a well somewhere which no one owns, and which different people can use and whatnot. These are all great things to do: orphanages, hospitals, wells, but these should be funded through sadaqah, not zakah. That might seem pedantic to many people, but actually there's a specific function for this, a specific function for that. And even in our countries over here, like in the West, UK, Britain, we have within the Treasury different pots of money which are ring fenced for certain things, for the NHS, and they're kind of going to be ring fenced and protected, such that they're not going to be, this pot's not mixed with that pot, etc., etc. So that's about who is the recipient of zakah. For them to be poor or needy, there are 2 different yardsticks which are used. Some of the madhab say someone whose assets, surplus assets, unused ones, are beneath the nisab, because what sense would it be for them to be paying zakah and receiving it simultaneously? Others said no, and that's the Shafi'i, Hanbali, and Maliki schools say that no, it refers to anyone whose assets do not meet their needs. So basically, they're still struggling with their kids' basic education, or putting meals on the table, etc., etc. Their needs are not being met, then they would be mustahiq or eligible of zakat. Is it to be paid locally or globally? You can give some here and there, maybe a portfolio style where you do some here and some there. The classical position was you wouldn't ever be paying it outside the area where you're in, i.e., let's say for us within London, because beyond that you'd be shortening your prayers, and that would not be the norm for zakat to go beyond the region in which you are kind of resident. If you do have to give it to a charity, what questions might one consider asking? You may wish to ask them questions like, what's your zakat policy? Their answer should be that, our policy is what it says in the Quran, only those 8 categories. Then the next question is, so then what procedures do you have in place to ensure those policies are upheld? So, for example, is it given to a Muslim or a non-Muslim? How do you ascertain? We're not asking to have surety. We just want to know what are the measures you take for upholding that policy. Do you means test them, or do you use local partners who know who the people are, etc., etc., whether they're likely to be eligible or not? What's the policy? And then what are the procedures in place to uphold that policy? And thirdly, do you have a panel of scholars who are independent, and who have, powers to kind of say this is right and this is wrong, and that you will actually kind of correct your errors if you're falling foul of the Islamic standards required for the institution of zakat or not? So I would ask, what's your zakat policy? What procedures do you have in place to uphold that policy? And do you have independent scholars who oversee this? And if they look like they've got independent scholars who maybe you're aware of, or who look like they've got credentials and are well known amongst and trusted, then inshallah there's hope that things are moving the right sort of direction. And of course you can do your other steps of due diligence as well, and that's something good to do. And then it's in the hands of Allah. But the thing to remember is that giving it to a charity is not sufficient alone, because the charity in question is actually, yours. It's my. They're acting as my agent, my representative to give it to the poor. It's not that once they've received it, it's as if the poor person's received it. No, they're not representatives appointed by the poor people. They're representatives appointed by us to give it to the poor people. So one needs to try and make sure that the charity in question are known for amana, for trustworthiness, being responsible, etc., etc., and that they've done their best and are truly professional and diligent in rendering their responsibilities and giving the zakat to the poor and the needy. I don't think there are any other questions right now that are being asked, so I will stop thereabouts, inshallah, to allow you all some time to make dua before Maghrib, so that you can focus with and not be distracted by the me speaking on one hand and you making dua on the other side, inshallah. So I will stop here, inshallah, unless there are any questions. Okay, so then we'll stop. اللهم اقسم لنا من خشيتك ما تحول به بيننا وبين معصيتك ومن طاعتك ما تبلغنا بها جنتك ومن اليقين ما تهون به علينا مصائب الدنيا ومتعنا بأسماعنا وبصارنا قوتنا ما أحييتنا واجعله الوارث منا. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. سبحانك اللهم وبحمده سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأستغفر الله وأتوب إليه. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.